I'm going to call this the Kotaro Uchikoshi bingo card. And essentially, I try to fill in 24 spaces with repeating motifs. I don't know if motifs is quite the right word. Elements of the plot of Kotaro Uchikoshi's games. Without a script, I didn't write a script for this, and hopefully in one take. This is pretty risky. I might mumble and stumble my way through, but this is what I set out to do, this is what I want to do, so I'm going to try to make it happen. It should be fairly obvious by the first couple sentences, but in case you didn't pick up on this, this will contain extremely heavy spoilers for every single Uchikoshi game that I've either watched somebody else play or have I played myself, which it basically includes every game that I can read in English by some means. The games that he wrote that I cannot, or at least most of them, I do have some plans in the future to play them, but I do have to do some language work before I can, because they're of course written in Japanese, which is a language that I currently don't understand. So those ones include the Infinity series, at least the main line, the core of the Infinity series, which is Never 7, Ever 17, and Remember 11, which I have played myself. The Zero Escape series, which is 999, Virtue's Last Reward, and Zero Time Dilemma, which I've not played myself, but I've watched other people play several times, and I'm very familiar with them. And the AI the Somnium Files series, which is AI the Somnium Files and AI the Somnium Files, the Nirvana Initiative. The first one I've watched other people play several times. The second one I've played myself. Just for brevity, throughout this, I'm probably going to nickname them AI and AI2, inspired by how the install folder that you install the game into, if you buy it off Steam, the second game, that is named AI the Somnium Files 2. The ones that I haven't played are Memories Off Second, and 12 Riven. I definitely plan to play 12 Riven eventually. Memories Off, not as much, maybe. Just to be clear, I believe Uchikoshi only wrote the first two Memories Off games. The series keeps continuing, but KID, and I think eventually after that Mages, at some point it was called 5BP, whatever, brought on other authors to write that series. Because I guess that series is generic enough that anybody could write it, or something like that. And according to Wikipedia, there's one more game in his discography, but it's one of those things where you find it in the back room behind the black curtain, and I don't really know anything about it, or could find anything else about it. So there is one mysterious other game. But those are the game, and that's as much as that I know of. Okay, let's start trying to, now that the spoiler warning and the game list is out of the way, let me start trying to actually fill out the card. So, first one I'm going to type in here, and unfortunately my microphone cable is situated in a really annoying place. I didn't take care of that beforehand. And the microphone itself. Amnesia, which, as you may be aware, I can't spell hardly anything. So every single Uchikoshi game that I am familiar with has some element of amnesia in it. So in Never 7, that would be you keep going back in time, but at first you don't remember remember the events that you experienced your first before you went back in time. So you don't realize you went back in time and have already experienced them. So you're in an infinite loop that's 7 days long, but you don't remember what happened the previous time you went through the loop, and you don't realize you're in a loop until eventually, it was looping enough times, your, I guess, subconscious decides to try to loop back, but with some memories, maybe a little bit more memories each time, until you finally loop back with enough memories to stop the loop. So kind of a softer form of amnesia, non-traditional. Maybe you could argue it doesn't count, but at least there's something there that you could use to try to claim that Never 7 has some form of amnesia in it. And Virtue's Last Reward repeats that idea where you keep going back in time. You try going through the timeline of the game and then you go back in time when you fail, and you do this over and over again until you figure out a way using the knowledge from the previous cycles to break the cycle or learn what you need to learn. Virtue's Last Reward is essentially a training camp where you learn how to go back in time without losing memories of the future. In Ever 17, there is a character, I believe his name is Ryogo Kabaraki, who gets amnesia with no explanation whatsoever, forgets everything about himself, including his name, at the beginning of the game. And according to some apocrypha of the Ever 17 story, he never gains it back. At the beginning of the timeline in the year 2017 of Ever 17, the beginning of the game, he loses his memories and he never gains them back. The original game does not provide an explanation. According to the TV tropes page, the remake for the Xbox, different authors, not Uchikoshi, did actually add in a explanation. I've tried to read some of the remake. It's in Japanese, so it's hard to read for me. But I haven't gotten to the part where they would explain that yet. In addition, Ever 17 has this kind of fourth wall break thing where a different character, which I guess we're going to call Hokuto, is what his name is, loses his memories. And this is because he essentially gets possessed by the person playing the game, and because the person playing the game doesn't know anything about the backstory of the character, he doesn't get to know it either. You get like this intersection of the memories of the player and Hokuto, and that intersection is very little material. In Remember 11, they repeat the same thing. You play through the same timeline twice from two different perspectives. First, you play through as Kokoro, and from your playthrough as Kokoro, you would expect that Satoru would know a whole lot more and be able to reveal a whole lot more about what's going on when you play as him. But then when you do, you're surprised to find that Satoru has amnesia because he is possessed with the person playing the game, which we're going to call the third eye, and doesn't remember anything but the stuff that Kokoro learned, because the player knows what Kokoro learned because he played as Kokoro. In 999, there is a character that nicknames himself, I don't know what his real name is, 7, who claims to have similar kind of amnesia to perhaps Kabaraki in Ever 17, where he doesn't really remember who he is or what his name, what his occupation is, his backstory, but he knows kind of like basic life etiquette. He remembers how to talk and everything, but doesn't remember anything related to himself. And the explanation they give is because he was given a very high dose of a drug called soporil beta. Now, and throughout the game, he slowly starts to remember things to get his memory back. And due to his role in the backstory of the game, his memories actually are really important, and the unlocking of his memories starts to explain the mysterious situation that the characters are in. At the very end of the game, there is a suggestion without confirmation that 7 may have never had amnesia actually whatsoever. It was actually in on the plan of the masterminds of the game, or the masterminds of the story, and it was just pretending the whole time for the purposes of the masterminds of the story. Again, it's kind of suggested that might be an explanation to resolve a paradox in the game. It's not confirmed in the game. It's kind of like, what about this? Is kind of what the game is saying. In Virtue's Last Reward, I also said that it repeats that whole Never 7 thing. Even though the tones of Virtue's Last Reward and Never 7 are very dissimilar to each other, Never 7 is kind of this comfy romance game, whereas Virtue's Last Reward is very anxious and tense and a bit horror-ish. It's surprising how similar, going back and looking at Virtue's Last Reward after playing Never 7 and the whole memories thing is, like the premonitions, right? It seems like the characters are seeing premonitions in the same way that I was going to say Motoro. Mokoto does in Never 7. But also there's a character who nicknames himself K in in VLR, which is a short for Virtue's Last Reward, who also has amnesia. So double up on the amnesia here in VLR. And he may have amnesia because A, he was also shot with a high dose of Soporil, or it's Akane in the suit pretending to be, repeating the same lines as the amnesiac Sigma Climb clone. The other character besides Akane that could be K would say. And supposedly she would know what he would say because she can see the future or something. It makes and this character that has amnesia sits in a suit that conceals his or her body and face. And so you can't actually measure who was in the suit, which makes the suit kind of like a Schrodinger's cat box, where it's literally Akane or a clone of Sigma at the same time. Yes. Anyway, the point is he has amnesia. And then, I don't know why I'm going into this plot summary, going off on a tangent. The point is there's amnesia. That's enough, right? And then Zero Time Dilemma, you have this Sleeping Beauty problem sort of thing where the mastermind of the game comes up with this drug where he can wake you up for 45 minutes and then put you back to sleep, and you forget all the memories of that 45 minutes for which you've woken up. And this happens like periodically, and so every time you wake up, you don't have any memory of any previous times you've woken up, and you don't know how far into the future you woke up and what you've done in the past. In AI the Somnium Files, there's the classic sort of Born Identity style amnesia where somebody, I guess he wasn't a secret agent, he was actually a hitman, but the main character somewhere in his past loses his memories of everything he was before a certain date. And he takes up a new life that was given to him by a friend from before he lost his memories, but doesn't know the story behind that. And then, who exactly he was before he lost his memories is somewhat important to the story, and you eventually figure out as you go through. I never actually read The Born Identity. It's something that my mother sort of recommends to read. Apparently, it's a really good and very thrilling story. So I might do that eventually. So if I misrepresent The Born Identity, that's why. But The Born Identity is a classic thriller based on amnesia. And then in AI 2, the same thing happens again, where the same character loses his memories, and then 6 years later recalls them and remembers what happened before those 6 years after he lost his memories. In addition, one of the AI balls, one of the computer assists for the characters, loses their memories because they get damaged, or it's a she gets damaged after the Wadget system has been down for about a week. And so she doesn't have memories of a specific week. And that somewhat helps resolve some contrivance as to why, conveniently, stuff happening in that week in the past is not mentioned. In addition to that, another one of the main characters in AI2 has a mental disorder that is brought upon by stress, where he does have some memory loss, which causes him to do things that are seemingly like things that he should have. He's kind of not right in the head, where he's acting like he's in some timeline six years in the past, basically, because of he has some stress-induced amnesia problem. Anyway, so all of them have some element of amnesia. Now, there is a sort of argument with the amnesia thing. Like, what if I said, put in a bingo card space, and I said, Uchikoshi writes mysteries. And so I just wrote mysteries in the space. that would be sort of cheating, right? Like, that's just the genre he likes to write. You wouldn't say Orson Scott Card, really, you wouldn't sort of make a comment on him like, really, Orson Scott Card, you want another sci-fi novel? Really? That's all you can write is sci-fi? Really? You would make fun of Nora Roberts. Nora Roberts, all you can write is romance. Really? What's his name? Tom Clancy, right? Tom Clancy, all of Tom Clancy writes just keeps repeating. He writes war stories. He likes to write war thrillers, right? It's kind of stupid, right? So it's also similarly like, let's say you could say Uchikoshi writes stories with branching timelines. That would be kind of cheap, right? That would be kind of cheating, because that's kind of like the genre that he writes. So when it comes to things that are so prevalent, they're in every single game he wrote, you might kind of feel like that. But really, you could write a good mystery with branching timelines without having amnesia in it. Like, I don't really feel like amnesia is required for the genre that Uchikoshi likes to write. You could easily write a game or write a story that doesn't have amnesia in it, and it would still be good, and it would still fit, and still fit the genre that he wrote. He has the capability of doing that, but for some reason, every single game he writes still has amnesia in it. So, because it seems seemingly not required, but always there, I think it actually deserves its own space. Now, with this card, you want to give the game some chance of perhaps getting a bingo. So, you want to kind of make it so you can kind of get a bingo. The diagonals, the ones on the diagonals here, they can be part of 3 bingos. Whereas if something's off diagonal like this space, it can only be part of 2 bingos. So to make the bingo card game easier for each game, I would tend to want to make the most common repeating patterns on the diagonals, and then the less common ones off diagonal. Okay, let's fill in another one. I'm going to call this one Kids in the Hospital. So, very often in Uchikoshi's backstories for his characters, there will be kids in a hospital. And which is completely unnecessary, but he tends to do that. It's not in every single game like Amnesia, but it's pretty common. So, in Ever 17, and Never 7, we have this character that's off screen, but is named Julia, this American girl named Julia, who is in the hospital because she needs treatment for leukemia. And she is miraculously cured by a virus that was spread to her called the Cure virus, which is a retcon of the Never 7 story, or it's just an explanation of the Never 7 story. It's debatable whether you can call it a retcon, because it's considered just an explanation. But, and she's visited by, and it makes it worse, she tends to be visited by Tsugumi in the backstory of Ever 17. In Remember 11, there's a kid called, oh my goodness, I struggle so much with the names. It's Utsumi and Utsumi's son. What's his name? I should be able to remember what his name is. The name's not coming to me at the moment, and that's really frustrating. Utsumi, Kali, and man, I can't actually remember the name of his father either. He was a really big character in the game. Mountain Climber Man. Oh my goodness. You'll notice this with some of my Let's Plays too. Like, I have a hard time remembering the names exactly. Like the quiz at the beginning of AI2, which I haven't actually published yet. I spell Saito's name Sato, and I spell Mizuki Miyuki, and I failed the quiz. Junichi. Is it Junichi? Something like that. So he ends up in a bike accident. So his father buys him a bike for his birthday. He gets in a bike accident. Nothing really serious happens, but they put him in the hospital just in case, which is stupid. And in the hospital, he gets murdered by a serial killer who kills every single person in the hospital. Brutally. In 999, the children are picked for this experiment, this morphogenetic field experiment, this telepathy experiment. Lieblich Pharmaceuticals all knew that they were espers because they all happened to show up and be patients in a hospital that was administered by Lieblich Pharmaceuticals. VLR is a break from this. In Virtue's Last Reward, there's a kid named Sean who, I don't remember the exact details of this, but something sort of like, he was in the hospital, he had some life-threatening condition. It isn't clear what exactly it was. A doctor was on call, a surgeon on call, was rushing over there to perform an emergency operation, but he got caught in traffic, and somehow that traffic congestion was caused by an investigation of a murder that happened to be the murder of Eric's mom by a serial killer nicknamed the Heart Ripper, which actually turned out to be Mira, and she ordinarily would not have encountered Eric's mom, but Eric's mom took her, morning walk, I guess, just for exercise, for leisure, a different route than usual, because she wasn't willing to walk a certain direction, because it would cross paths with a snail. Anyway, as a result, Sean, who was in the hospital, died. In AI, well, there is a hospital and multiple characters end up in it, like Ota, different endings like Ota and Iris and so on. Whether or not those are considered kids, I don't know. I would consider Ota a kid. Unlike the other games where it's something in the backstory, the hospital is a location in the story itself in AI, so it kind of breaks from the pattern a little bit. And of course, AI 2, we have kids in the hospital. We have the same location, and so we have still kids in the hospital again. Again, this time more on screen during the story than in the backstory. But Nene, which in English translation I think they changed it to BB, does have a heart condition which may have landed her in the hospital occasionally as a child. Although it's not exactly clear. We know that she does end up in the hospital because of it later on, after an event in the story happens where it ends up getting worse. So, kids in the hospital, pretty common. And sort of continuing the theme of backstory stuff, another thing you see pretty commonly is twins. They tend to be fraternal twins, one male, and one female. But I think, what's her face? It's an 8. The 8 lady. Lotus. Yes. Lotus's twins may have been both daughters, if I recall correctly. Or they might have been specified. At least one of them was a daughter. So, this starts out in Ever 17, where we have a set of twins. That was Hokuto and Sara. Again, they tend to be fraternal. One was a man, one was a boy, one was a girl. In 999, we have Lotus has twins. In Virtue's Last Reward, we don't have twins. In Zero Time Dilemma, we have another set of twins. We have Delta and Phi. So I'm trying to remember if there are any sets of twins like that in AI. I don't believe so. So sets of twins, pretty common. That's only 3 games, but that's still common enough to put on this list. I think I'll put that on off diagonal though, because it's not common enough maybe to go on a diagonal. Another one would be brother, sister, supportive duo. That's what I'm going to call this. I forgot the T. So this kind of happens a lot. So Hokuto and Sara, in their childhood, right? Hokuto was kind of the hero for the bigger brother, was kind of the hero for the younger sister Sara. The thing is, though, they're actually twins. They're not older and younger, but it kind of feels like that. Although it could technically be the case if Hokuto was the one that came out first. but they did not specify that in the story, which one came out first. Or did they? I forget. I'll have to reread that part. And then we have Akane and Aoi in 999, and we also have Snake and Clover in 999. Those two pairs are both not twins. They actually have an older brother and a younger sister. Then I think that's all of them for the pattern there. That's another somewhat less common one, but it's common enough that you would kind of expect that to show up if you're doing playing a new Uchikoshi game and you wanted to like check things off on a bingo card. So I'm going to put that on there anyway. Given that it happened 3 times, although it happened only twice. 2 times it happened is 2 times that it's happened is in the same game. Okay, going more off like the brother-sister supportive duo theme and twins theme, we're also going to put on here cloning. So this is, in the Infinity series, part of the lore is there's something called the clone law, which made cloning legal. So there are clones in the Infinity series, but even still there are clones from before it was made legal, because that's a thing. So, what's her face? Kurumi and Haruka are clones in Never 7, even though they don't really look like each other, although there are hints given in the dialogue about them looking like each other. In Ever 17, Yubisei Harukana and Yubisei Akikana are clones. And remember 11, they have to bring up the topic of cloning just because it's an Infinity Series game, but it isn't really relevant to the plot. So remember 11 is kind of a break from cloning, and so is 999. But VLR, we have Dr. Sigma Climb clone himself to have another person to use in the Nonary game. It'd be a Soldier's Cat complement to alternative state to Akane, which is kind of like clone just for the sake of cloning, because there's no real reason why that character has to be a clone, is there? And then finally in AI2, Nene is cloned, and the clone of Nene is Mizuki. In a plot pattern that is extremely similar to Ever 17. On the kind of the issue of cloning, there is some obsession seemingly with Uchikoshi and biotechnology. So I'm going to say villain is biotech organization. I'm going to say pharmaceutical company. I don't know how to spell any of this stuff in parentheses. So, I can't spell villain. So, in Ever 17, and this is not like super common, this only happens in like 3 games, but it's a very memorable, quintessential Uchikoshi thing, so that's why I'm putting it on a diagonal. In what's it called? I don't know why I'm spacing out. Ever 17, this organization is called Lieblich Pharmaceuticals. And 999, we have Cradle Pharmaceuticals. And in AI2, we have this is not actually the main villain, but it is something that you're supposed to dislike when you read the story. The Horodori Genetics Institute, or the Horodori Institute of Genetics. And on that topic, we have, I will put this as a diagonal thing, human experimentation. Now, the human experimentation typically tends to be on children, but it's not exclusively on children if you look at all the games. So, the ones where there's human experimentation on children are Ever 17, right? Lieblich kidnaps citizens. We don't know how many and for all the purposes of which they do this, but the ones we know of are Tsugumi and a friend Tsugumi made while she was in the laboratory. They kidnap children, and they would do experiments on them of unknown nature. The only thing that the game really specifies in detail is that they took blood very often, and the nature of the experiments they did on Sarah made her think that the incident when she was trapped in the underwater amusement park, she thought that that was another one of the experiments being done on her, or at least she was skeptical that it might be another experiment being done on her. So it's a hint that maybe some of the experiments that Lieblich did were psychological experiments like that. 999, Cradle Pharmaceuticals does an experiment with children that is trying to, that was an attempt to observe children communicating with each other telepathically using the morphogenetic field. In AI2, these are all the ones where, the villain is some sort of biotech organization. Shikara Horodori was trying to modify human DNA to make them humans immortal. But he also had some other side goals, it seems. And he would do things like, he had these test subjects who would modify their DNA, but after he did that, he would do things like break their bones to figure out how fast they would heal, and shock them, and do horrendous, torturous experiments on the children. But that's not really, it's not limited to children necessarily, because Never 7 itself is a human experiment. It's an experiment that was put on by Izumi, trying to observe the psychological Curie syndrome, which is, I guess, different than the pathological, or I don't know, I was going to say viral, the effect of the virus called Curie syndrome. I guess the Curie virus causes Curie syndrome in the sense that, the human immunodeficiency virus causes AIDS. But it was trying to observe a psychological effect, and he had a human guinea pig that she set up an experiment and guinea pigged on him. And that was done on an adult because the main character, I believe, was around 20 years old in that story. You could argue that the human experiment that Ever 17, when Sara is actually correct, because it's not exactly clear how Yubisai Harukana manages to take control of the facility of Lemu in order to destroy Lemu and carry out her recreation of an incident that occurs 17 years before she takes control of Lemu. Given that Lemu is a Lieblich pharmaceutical facility. Like, how did she manage to get in there and study it and destroy it, essentially, without Lieblich and then hang out there on top of it, without Lieblich, figuring out that she did it and punish her, right? And it might be that Lieblich was actually in on the whole thing. And she actually pitched this proposal to Lieblich, which would actually suggest that Lieblich agreed to get the Kurinari family back together, which may explain why they could have had Tsugumi any day at some point and they didn't, for the purposes of this experiment. And so the actual experiment was indeed, and so partially, Yubisei Harukana, managed to carry out the experiment. I gotta answer the phone, which makes this so it won't be one take, unfortunately. Okay, I'm back from getting the phone. So I think what I was talking about, where I left off, was how Yubisai Harukana could have had Lieblich Pharmaceuticals on board with doing her recreation of the events of 2017 and 2034. There's a way to interpret it. And so Sara may have been somewhat correct about it being an experiment done on her by Lieblich Pharmaceuticals. So Yeah, the ones without a human experiment in them, I guess, would be VLR is less of an experiment and more of a training camp. Um, Zero Time Dilemma, it was kind of an experiment. They were basically trying to simulate a colony on Mars, I believe, um, and seeing how people would respond to that kind of communication schedule with Earth. So I don't know if you necessarily would call that an experiment, so to speak, but I guess maybe you could. More like a trial run, a training camp as well. Um, anyway, I guess the ones you can really necessarily claim there wasn't a human experiment going on. Well, I was going to say Remember 11, but that was also somewhat of an experiment because that was the first time that was done in that universe, was in that game. The whole time travel body swapping thing at that scale. So that was kind of an experiment. And apparently some backstory apocryphal stuff that I haven't read that associates Lieblich Pharmaceuticals with Satoru. So I guess AI 1 is the one that you can really confirm there wasn't human experimentation going on. Unless you consider the Sync's human experimentation. Then they're all human experimentation. Every single game has some element of human experimentation going on. Children or adults. Okay. So we got the backstory stuff. Brother-sister supportive duo, twins, human experimentation, and cloning. Another thing I put in here is single mom. So, you also say orphans. I think that would serve as one of these things, orphans. Because orphans is kind of a little bit not enough. That's why it's an off diagonal, because we have orphans in 999 and orphans in AI2. And orphans are somewhat orphans in AI1. Maybe necessarily say orphans, but like passing your kid around to someone who's different than their biological parents, which turned out to be not their biological parents. But I'm gonna put it there because it's gonna be hard to fill all 24 spaces. So we're probably gonna need something like orphans in there to make all the spaces filled. But as far as single moms are concerned, we have Tsugumi being a single mom, at least briefly for like a couple years. We have Lotus being a single mom. Oh, I just remembered the name of the mountain. One of the names of the mountain climber guy, Seiji. That's his last name, probably. Yomogi Seiji. There we go. But anyway, we have in AI1 Hitomi raising Iris as a single adopted mom. We also have Date raising, Mizuki as a single dad, except there isn't enough single dads to put single dad on the bingo card, because it has to be something that repeats, right? Something that Uchikoshi reuses. So, single dad isn't one of them. I tend to put single mom more often. Also, the boss in AI2 ends up being like a adopted single mom, because she does part of the work of raising Nene by herself. So, yeah, there's the single mom stuff. We can also add in here crisis pregnancy. So, crisis pregnancies, we have Tsugumi and it's somewhat of a crisis pregnancy because she doesn't really have the medical resources to deal with it, but deals with it anyway in Ever 17. Yubisai Harukana also gets pregnant, but it was planned, so I don't know if it was necessarily a crisis. She was kind of young to get pregnant. She was 16, but the pregnancy was planned out, and she had a stable enough home situation it could have worked. She didn't have trouble raising the child. But we had Yuki being a single mom. There's another single mom I forgot about, the single mom thing. And Yubisai Harukana had to raise Yubisai Akikana as a single mom. So, more single moms that I forgot about when I did single moms. And in Zero Time Dilemma, we have the crisis pregnancy of Diana. She's in a situation where she really doesn't have the resources to raise children because she doesn't have food for her children or even herself. And it dooms her to starving to death. She may have starved to death anyway, but she starves to death even sooner because of the children. And a copy of the children may have starved to death as well. The problem is that we don't know if Delta set it up so that they would get bailed out after the birth occurred. Because all he needed to do was recreate the situation of his birth. He didn't necessarily need to kill off his parents. But the implication of the game is, no, they starve to death afterwards. Everyone else, they don't get bailed out. They get trapped in decom, and they just starve to death in decom. Although, doesn't decom end eventually? It's implied that in the backstory of Lotus, she does end up in a crisis pregnancy at some point. Which, of course, the crisis pregnancy with twins. Of course, Tsugumi's pregnancy is with twins and winds her up as a single mom. And Diana's crisis pregnancy is also with twins. We also have in AI, Manaka getting an inconvenient pregnancy with the daughter of So. It's kind of an unfortunate pregnancy. We have in AI2, some other woman have a crisis pregnancy with another son, this time of So. And after she gives birth, she kills herself. We have Tokiko in a crisis pregnancy or an unwanted pregnancy with the son of Chikara Horodori. And those two, the two crisis babies in AI2, have rather compatible organs for some reason. Something about being a crisis baby. So a lot of crisis babies in AI2. And I guess I could add this in here. Conception in forced confinement. Because when you do play Virtue's Last Reward, if you've already played Ever 17 or vice versa, when you encounter the characters are part of a family, but it isn't quite clear yet, but they give you a hint that they're part of the family by staging up scenes to set them up to look like a family. And then you figure out later in the game that two characters have sex while in the crisis situation, in the forced confinement, which results in twins. And and those twins end up back in the story by some time travel shenanigans as grown people or older people. And the family gets back together and whatever. That thing repeating makes you go, wow, he's really repeating things. See if I can get conception spelled right. And of course, in both those instances, those conceptions in forced confinement result in a crisis pregnancy with twins. And in one case, they're being raised by a single mom. And then after that single mom gets them up, become orphans. They end up orphans anyway, in either case. And in one of those cases, they end up being a brother-sister supportive duo. You see how this works, right? Okay. Next thing I'm going to list here, I'm going to put this on a diagonal, not because it's super common, but because it's a quintessential Uchikoshi thing. I'm going to call salvation by replication. So this is the whole idea where you make a situation. This only happens in 2 games, but it's so quintessential, I'm still putting it on a diagonal. Where a mastermind recreates in some way or other a situation from the past because this somehow unlocks a way for there to be a communication across time between the two situations, the old one and the new one, which allows for the salvation of someone who died in the old situation. I haven't finished Your Turn to Die yet, but as much as I've played of it, it seems to be copying this idea. But I actually don't know if Your Turn to Die does that, and I guess I can save myself from spoilers, so something I didn't warn you I'm going to give you spoilers for, because I haven't played the end. It just recently came out as a paid game. I'll buy it and play the end though eventually. Anyway, salvation by replication. And a similar idea, I'm going to put it here, is an angle to look at the situation that confuses when things happen. That was kind of verbose. But this happens in Ever 17 and AI 2, where the player is tricked into thinking something at the beginning that maybe something that's happening at the same time is happening at different times is actually happening at the same time. Or the situation is such a way that it's easy to write it such that the way that the player views it can make two things that are happening at different times look like they're happening at the same time. That's really a mouthful. It's really hard to explain. But Ever 17 and AI2 do this. Also, AI2 has like a checkerboard, so it also makes things that happen. It makes it so that things that happen at different times seem to happen at the same time. It does the opposite effect too. You could also argue that Remember 11 does this, but it doesn't really do it that well. This twist is really easy to guess really early in Ever 17, and it's somewhat hard to guess and confusing in AI2. And of course, Ever 17 is the one case where they take this and they make it into a salvation by replication as well. But they're not necessarily always the same, go one with the other. For example, Remember 11 and AI2 might be this verbose explanation here where it's like the angle you look at it, where things happening at different times look like they look happening at the same time, but they're not necessarily salvation by replication. Whereas 999 is a salvation by replication, but you're not really confused in thinking that the incidents that are happening 9 years apart are happening at the same time. It's pretty clear that the experiment on the kids happened 9 years before the experiment on the adults. Okay. Let's see here. Here's a kind of a weird, obscure one. I'm going to call it Woman... Not obscure, this is like a vague one that's kind of cheating. But again, I have to fill out all 24 spaces, so at some point I'm going to have to kind of go down and kind of scrape up the crumbs off the floor. Women are smart. Well, that sounds lame. Basically, you tend to sort of notice that perhaps the most intelligent, or quote-unquote smart, as characters in the game tend to be women. So, in Never 7, there are two male characters that are both really dumb. Whereas the game claims that Haruka is really smart, although it doesn't really do much to demonstrate it. Utsumi is the professor, right? In Ever 17, the person who's the best situational awareness, at least in the 2017 situation, is Tsugumi. And so a good batch of writing, Tsugumi isn't necessarily correct about everything, right? She thinks the researcher might be Koko's dad, which is actually Yu's dad. But she has the best awareness of the situation, and she has some weird, unusual skills, like she can weld things, and apparently she can sew up wounds too. It's like, something I could kind of reckon it to is Spock, right? In Star Wars, the original series, you have Spock and you have Bones. Spock could do Bones' job better than Bones could. But he doesn't because he doesn't have time for that, right? Sometimes you could have somebody who's better at everybody else's job than they would be at their job. But Spock doesn't really have time to do everybody's job. So he can't do everything, so he has to do his own thing, and they have allocation. So he could be better captain than Kirk, maybe. Although that's arguable. That's actually the arguable exception. I mean, you'd be a better pilot than Suru, a better navigator than Chekhov, a better communicator than Alhira, a better doctor than Bones. Maybe he wouldn't actually be a better captain than Kirk. But he can't do all those jobs at the same time, and so they still have to allocate. Tsugumi's kind of like that, where she might actually be a better medical technician than Yu is. But because she has to play her different role in the story, Yu has to be that person. Anyway. Also, Yu is the one who becomes the professor, figures out a way to make an android body for Sora, to play politics in Lifelink Pharmaceuticals, in order to be able to replicate the situation that happened 17 years ago. And is relatively smart compared to the male characters. You can also argue that Coco's kind of smart in a weird way. And Sara is apparently a computer genius. In Remember 11, Utsumi has some weird medical knowledge or some weird, bizarre pharmaceutical knowledge. It's very plot convenient out of nowhere. Lynn is some sort of... I don't think she's really smart. She's kind of a troll lawyer. Remember, but that's kind of like the person that seems the smartest through the course of Remember 11 is, like, as you play, seems to be Utsumi. This isn't necessarily canon, though, because you could argue the smartest person is Pre-Amnesia Satoru. But Pre-Amnesia Satoru is not even in the story, so he doesn't really count. In 999, the person with seemingly the most situation awareness in the chess master, with some weird, bizarre knowledge of morphogenetic fields and the Titanic, is Akane. And Lotus is also apparently an IT person who's very good with computers. In Virtue's Last Reward, Alice is some sort of savant. Now, I think that's really... And of course, Akane is there too. You could argue, though, in that one that it's kind of like Remember 11, where old man Sigma is the one that's kind of the smartest. But the thing is, old man Sigma isn't even in the story as you play it, right? You're playing as young man Sigma. And Phi is also oddly smart, right? Phi can figure out anagrams instantly. Yeah, and you play as young man Sigma. Young man Sigma isn't really, he's just kind of like a generic protagonist dodo brain. He doesn't really have much smarts. So the women, Phi and Alice, are the smartest people in the environment. And I think Luna also has medical knowledge, if I recall. She's also a robot. That makes her smart, too. Zero Time Dilemma, you get Akane back again, and there's this implication that on the Saw game puzzles, Akane knows how to solve them, and sometimes they have to do something like she are getting accidentally electric shocked to take her out, so that she can't, before she actually solves the Saw game puzzles. There's this emphasis on Akane being smart a little bit in Zero Time Dilemma. And then I think, I'm trying to think about AI, how AI does this. AI is more of a women are powerful kind of thing than a women are smart kind of thing. But you do have the boss. And the AI balls you interact with the most are female. Which there tends to be a pattern with Uchikoshi games that the female characters seem to be the most intelligent. Or at least the most intelligent one or two characters in the game are female. So another one, I think I'll put this one on the diagonals. Diagonal is serial killers. So we have Inabushi Keiko and Remember 11, serial killer, this character in the game. We have Mira in Zero Time Dilemma, serial killer. And they seem to be those are very similar serial killers. They both, well, Inabushi Keiko killed people in a variety of different ways. One of the ways Keiko killed people was cut open their chest and rip their heart out. That is exclusively how Mira kills people. So it seemed like Mira was somewhat of a repeat of Inabushi Keiko. And then AI is all about serial killers. Saito Sejima is a serial killer, and Uru in what's his face in AI killed 3 people. I guess that makes him a serial killer. Although he's more of a purposeful serial killer than a natural serial killer, like the other 3 serial killers. You could also, so there are sort of like set serial killer characters that are there are serial killers going into the game. The serial killing is part of their backstory. But also, you could count in serial killers where the stressful situation of the game itself turns someone who otherwise wouldn't be a serial killer into one. The most famous of those being Clover in 999. right? She converts into a serial killer in the situation, and kills what seems to be would be 5 people, right? She kills everybody but Lotus and Ace, which if there's 9 people there, that excluding her, Lotus, and Ace would be in 6 people. It'd be 6 deaths. Also, Ace is kind of a villain. He's kind of a bad dude, right? He's killed kids in incinerators in his past, but he turns into a serial stabber given the situation that is presented to him in 999 in certain bad endings. Utsumi, you could argue, turns into a serial killer as she kills 2 people. I guess 2 people is enough to be serial, given her situation where she kills Satoru, and then she would turn after killing Satoru and killing Keiko. It's kind of a stretch because it's 2 people. In 999, Dio, who's a clone of Left, I don't know if he's known as a killer, although he could be, does try to kill everybody. So you could say, given the situation, he became a serial killer. So you have some of that. Yeah. A lot of serial killing. Let's see here. What else can I do? Ah, yes. Water threat. Not a super common one, but 3 games that 999 and Ever 17 share commonality in that there's some threat of drowning in the situation. In Ever 17, it's more present, and characters actually die of drowning. In 999, it's a little bit more detached from it. It's only really something that creates tension in the first room and in some dirty jokes later. Okay. Trying to find how many spaces I have to fill. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I have to fill 8. I guess we're going to have to... Oh, I know a really good one. This one should go on a diagonal. I have a diagonal space right here. Pandemics. Actually, this is one of the first ones I should have put down. So, if you recall Deep Blue from Ever 17, and then Radical 6 from Virtue's Last Reward, which shows up again as in combination with another disease, and Zero Time Dilemma, as well as TC Purge and AI2. So, along with his pharmaceutical companies, Uchikoshi likes his pandemics or threats of pandemics. A pandemic doesn't really happen. Well, in AI2 because it stops before it happens, but in Virtue's Last Reward and Ever 17, the pandemic actually does happen. The virus leaks out and actually wreaks some havoc. Here's another one. Treatment pod that also can perform plot-relevant cryosuspension. Again, something that he's only done in 2 of his games, but because he's done the exact same thing in those 2, in Virtue's Last Reward and Ever 17, it's worth putting on the bingo card, because it's a really significant reuse of something. Well, I'll do this and I'll put the O back in. Here's another one they should have put here a long time ago. That is suicide. So, of course, in Ever 7, how you get the good ending with Yuka is you kill yourself with her by jumping off a cliff. And somehow that saves you. You save yourself by killing yourself. And I guess it's supposed to be like a racing into the night thing. Because if you kill yourself together with a girl, that's like romantic. Of course, Saki is also gets suicidal at the end of her route, but in that one, the answer is not to kill yourself, which makes Never 7 kind of intellectually inconsistent. Do I kill myself or not? Does the girl kill herself or not? What exactly do I do here? In Never 17, Tsugumi claims to want to die. However, it doesn't really seem like she really does. She's just claiming that perhaps to be a tsundere. But I guess there's some discussion of the concept of suicide in that way. In one of the bad endings in Remember 11, Kokoro can feel guilty about the death of... do you have to remember the name of the kid now? Yuni. There we go. The death of Yuni, and so she kills herself. Also, Utsumi, in one of the endings after she kills Keiko, if she's allowed to do that, she kills herself. In AI2, we'll start with AI1. In the backstory, when Shoko, man, it's a hard name to remember, Shoko Nadami, when Shoko gets body swapped with the mob boss guy because Saito was in the body of the old mob boss guy, she kills herself by jumping off the top of a building, I think. And then in AI2, the mother of Uru, who had an affair with So, kills herself somehow. Yes. Is that all the suicides? Oh yeah, Radical 6. So, in Virtue's Last Reward, one of the side effects of coming down with Radical 6 is a strong desire to kill yourself. So I think Quark gets a desire to kill himself. I don't think he ever actually does. Alice actually literally kills herself in some of the bad routes in VLR. Okay, I think I got it all now. I got the Radical 6 thing. 'Cause that's actually the biggest suicide, is the Radical 6 effect. This is kind of a cheater one, but I'm going to put it here anyway. Boobs. So, Never 7 has a CG of like big is it just Uzumi boobs? And there are jokes about the size of Haruka and Kurumi's boobs that Kurumi brings on herself. I don't think we have to really deal so much with boobs in Ever 17, or we do have to deal with boobs in Remember 11 because Satoru says something like, as kind of this boob angst, where he doesn't like wearing a bra and he really wants to not have boobs when he's in the body of Kokoro. Apparently he doesn't like having boobs. In 999, we have, what's her face? Lotus being weirdly scantily dressed for apparently no reason. And then in Virtue's Last Reward, we have Alice, who isn't even wearing like a bikini top or bra of any sort. She just has some sort of weird necklace just kind of lying over her nipples. And it's essentially just topless the whole time. In Virtue's Last... I already talked about Virtue's Last Reward. Zero Time Dilemma, we have Miru have this really low-cut shirt with like this unzipped jacket, so she's showing boobs essentially the whole time in her character design. In the AI games, we have boob jokes about the receptionist with big boobs, and we have the boss with big boobs and this low-cut outfit showing a lot of boobs. And in AI2, we have a bunch of A-cup angst jokes back and forth between Aiba and Mizuki. So anyway, a lot of boobs in Uchikoshi games. Here's the next one, I guess. This one should kind of go on a diagonal, but... or or out of diagonal spaces. So I'll put it on this row here. Time travel does not exist. Okay. I did the capitalization. I don't know why I'm doing capitalization now. This capitalization is going to be really inconsistent at the end. Capitalizing every word sometimes and sometimes not. So this is the idea that you have something like a mystery in the plot, something that's kind of weird and hard to explain that you might be able to explain by time travel. But it turns out that time travel is just a cheap explanation. And there's a better explanation for what's going on than time travel, and time travel is just a red herring. So this is done in Ever 17, where Yubi Sayaki kind of insists, where you as the Blinkwinkle or the main character, or Hokuto, thinks that maybe the reason why Yubi Sayaki-kan's parents died so much longer ago than she thought they did is because she time traveled forward. And you emphasizes time travel doesn't exist. And she's right. There's a different explanation for it than time travel. And Yubi Sayaki-kan's case is just because her quote-unquote mother, who happened to be her clone mother, just lied to her the whole time about when her parents died. And who her parents are, really. And what looks like time travel, perhaps maybe, it's easy to catch the twist in Ever 17, but what's supposed to look like to the player that could be explained by time travel actually isn't time travel. Same thing with AI2. Uchikoshi tries to set up a situation that to the player might look like half bodies time traveling, but actually nothing time traveled, and time travel is a weak explanation. It's a cop-out. Actually, something more sophisticated is going on, and the whole thing can be explained without time travel. The reason why these time travel does not actually exist twists work is because there are some Uchikoshi games where time travel does exist. Which, debatable about Never 7, because you could argue that Never 7 is just all taking place in the fantasies of Mokuto's mind and is not even canon in its own universe. I mean, if it were canon in its own universe, then yes, time travel would exist in Never 7. But time travel also does exist definitely in Remember 11. And in 999, you can't travel through time necessarily, but you can communicate between characters across different points in time. So that's kind of a type of time travel. Virtue's Last Reward, time travel does exist. It's done by shifting and jumping, which are two distinct things. In Zero Time Dilemma, time travel exists. You can do it by... You don't really do time travel by shifting in Virtue's Last... In Zero Time Dilemma. That's something you do in Virtue's Last Reward, though. But you do time travel using the transporter. Instead, the shifting mostly just moves you sideways in time. Like, it puts you on different timelines. So, when you play it, Uchikoshi... also, another one for time travel does not exist is AI1. Where Date thinks, oh, maybe I saw the future murdered body of Iris, when he didn't. That's another time travel is a red herring game. The time travel does not exist games where time travel is a red herring. Those work because the precedent of other games that the author wrote where time travel does exist, it is the explanation. You have 2 more spots to fill. And I'm probably going to have this fridge moment after I'm done with this, where I'm going to realize other stuff that was probably a better priority to put in these slots than what I'm going to put in these slots now. But just to be thorough, I'm going to review the games. So, Ever 17, we have the time travel, Virtue's Last Reward style. We have the Smart Woman. We have the Schrodinger's Cat Box. That gives me another one. Schrodinger's Cat Box. Schrodinger's Cat Box. There's actually a, umlaut you're supposed to put over the O in Schrodinger. I'm too lazy. So, this happens really twice, but it's a iconic quintessential Uchikoshi thing, so it's warranted putting it on the bingo card. So the first time it happens is in Ever 17, where IBF just kind of subsists and exists underneath the sea for 17 years under Lemieux, and it's implied that no one actually ever goes down there. And it could or could not could contain the suspended living, I guess, bodies of Koko and Takeshi, but may not, depending on whether or not you go back in time and save them by yelling at Takeshi, "Get up, Dad!" It's kind of silly, but because so it's like so whether or not he's there or not, though, it depends on something you do in the future, whether or not that happens. And so it's kind of like, because you don't know the future, it's like you don't know if the body's down there. And so Takeshi is kind of alive or dead at the same time, dead in IBF. Because you don't get out to measure whether he is or not. This also happens with Akane in Virtue's Last Reward. Depending on what you do, if you go back in time to save Akane, which you will do in the future, who occupies the K-suit could be Sigma's clone or Akane. And so before you do that, you don't know it. It's kind of like Akane or Sigma's clone in the suit at the same time. And you don't know until you measure it. Not the best physics, and it's not like really what Schrodinger's Cat's all about. Schrodinger's Cat's about randomness, and that's all deterministic, right? Whether or not you save Takeshi, whether or not you save Akane, is whether or not you do it. That's a deterministic thing, not random. So it's not really a good analogy to Schrodinger's Cat, but Uchikoshi likes doing it anyway. And then if you count Never 7, Schrodinger's Cat being a thing at all now comes into play. But Never 7 is one of those things where they bring up Schrodinger's Cat, but it doesn't really have anything analogous to Schrodinger's Cat really happening in it. It just doesn't really fit. And they kind of go off on a rant about that when my Let's Play on Never 7. Okay, one more spot. Gotta think of something good to put here, though. So go back to Ever 17. Ever 17 is like the whole replication by duplication, the salvation by duplication. It's got, forced confinement, gives first to twins, raised by a single nom until they become orphans. They can be experimented on. Brother sister supportive duo, and there's amnesia, there's water threat, and there's cloning, and here we go. This is going to be the last thing. Terminal health conditions. Only really happens in 3 games, unless you count the pandemic situations. But I think it's a quintessential enough Uchikoshi thing to warrant a spot. So, Yubi Saiharu Kana and Ever 17 and Nene and AI2 both have similar terminal heart condition. It isn't necessarily said outright that it's terminal in AI2, but there is you could do a wink sync into Nene, and you'll hear a nurse tell her about your life expectancy. And there is a sense of urgency in the conclusion for a need to cure her. So there's some suggestion that her heart condition may make her die early. But it is nailed down that it is terminal in the case of Yubisai Harukana. In addition, Iris in AI1 has a terminal brain tumor. In all of these, in the case of the terminal brain tumor and in the case of Yubisai Haru's heart condition, one way or another, they are cured in the end. You could also argue that Jin Furue's half-body tumor situation is also terminal. But with enough organ transplants, he could have been cured. So I don't know if that's necessarily terminal. They had something they could do to save him, I guess. Yeah. So I guess I managed to fill all 24 of these. I didn't necessarily use every single idea I could have used. I could have said escape rooms. You might think that's cheating because one of the series he wrote about was all about escape rooms, right? Zero Escape. It might seem like escape rooms as like that an author pattern is unfair because it's more of a series pattern. But you do see escape room-like things in AI2, which is not a Zero Escape game. And so because escape rooms started to leak out of that series a bit, it may be justified to stick escape rooms on the bingo card. Another thing that didn't make it on here that some people might try to mention is dirty jokes. I think it's cheating to put dirty jokes on the bingo card because all Japanese visual novels all seem to have dirty jokes at about the same frequency. You can try to narrow it down to make it more Uchikoshi-like. For example, I did boobs, which is kind of like a more Uchikoshi-ish style of dirty joke. But I don't know, horny main character, stuff like that. Another thing you could potentially put in there is light-hearted running gag that seems like it shouldn't be taken seriously, becomes super plot relevant. Right, Sigma being old, Date needing medication, the boss having a daughter, those kind of things. Another thing you could put in is, I said women are smart. You can also say women are powerful. You can also say women are dangerous, which might be accidentally projecting Remember 11 on a lot of his games. There's a lot of dangerous men. Another thing you put in that might actually rather take up a spot in this bingo card, besides maybe things like boobs, is masks. So there's a lot of masks in Uchikoshi games. We have the gas mask worn by Zero in 999. We have the K mask in Virtue's Last Reward. You have the Plague mask worn by Delta in Zero Time Dilemma. We have the helmet worn by Sean, which turns out to not be really a helmet, that's just his head. He's actually a robot, but they mistake it for a helmet, which is something that seems to be, they think something that's supposed to hide his face. We could skip over AI1, but in AI2 we have the upside down mask. That's held on by super glue developed by NASA. We have the iron mask that's worn by the Terror. We have the silicon mask worn by Date to hide spoilers for the first game. We have the mask worn by Gin. There's all kinds of masks in AI2. Another thing you see a lot of, just thought of something while I was thinking about masks, I forgot it right afterwards. Is everybody lives in the end. Everybody lives at the end. And with some of the games, this is kind of loose. And you have to say, everybody lives in the end that you're supposed to like and is not a villain. But in Zero Escape, I believe in all of the Zero Escape games, even the villains live at the end. Like Ace lives at the end of 999. Delta lives at the end of Virtue's Last Reward. Right? The game ends before potentially Carlos could shoot him. Everybody lives at the end of Ever 17. Everybody lives at the end of Never 7. The ones where you're kind of stretching it might be AI, because Shoko doesn't live, Renju doesn't live, the villain Saito doesn't live. AI2, the villain Uru doesn't live. Tokiko doesn't live unless you make an argument that unless you count the bonus ending. You could say that Andes Komeji doesn't live, and he's not really a villain. Which you go, yeah, I guess that's kind of like how that bonus ending is a spoof on the whole idea that in an Uchikoshi game, everybody lives at the end. But yeah, in an Uchikoshi game, it seems like the golden ending, the final ending, everybody lives. So if someone's dead, it suggests you haven't found the golden ending yet. Um, Another thing that's rather prime Uchikoshi is like conspiracy theories or weird little um, urban legends in popular culture. So like urban legends sort of things and characters stopping to talk about them in weird, unopportune times. These expose of these urban legends things, and sometimes they're brought up. They're like it's a thing in real life, but it's exaggerated for the sake of fantasy. Like the book, the book about that is like similar to the Titanic. It was made more similar to the Titanic. Uh, it's called Restitution or something like. No, Futility. Yeah, the book Futility. Things like that, where the similarities between the Futility and the Titanic are played up. So stuff like that is really common. There's one it was on the tip of my tongue and I was forgetting it. Um, it's a really good one too. This is what happens when you don't script these things. Also, thought experiments is kind of the urban legends. Oh yeah, supercomputer. Yeah, this is it. Facility has central supercomputer. Sorry for the delay there. Yeah, so in Ever 17 it's Lemay, and remember 11 there's a supercomputer in the basement of Sphia that's really just a red herring. It doesn't really do anything. It's just Inamoto just says there's a supercomputer there. Virtue's Last Reward, there's a supercomputer that runs the facility. It has an interactive AI. We call it supercomputer. Supercomputer is actually named Zero Junior. In Virtue's Last Zero Time Dilemma, there's a supercomputer that Delta keeps talking about. That's the seat of the soul of the android for Sean. In the AI games, there isn't really a central supercomputer, but supercomputing is something that's brought up. It's just kind of done by this diffuse network called the Wadget system. And on that topic of supercomputers, like, he also reuses sort of augmented reality assistant, which for some reason is always female. So this is the eyeballs in the AI games, and by a different mechanism, Sora in Ever 17, and similarly androids. So this is what they build Sora into at the end of Ever 17, into an android. We see Sean be an android in Zero Time Dilemma. We see Luna and be an android in Virtue's Last Reward, and some other androids besides Luna in Virtue's Last Reward. So a lot of androids in Uchikoshi, some prevalence of androids in Uchikoshi games. References to games by other games by the developer, by the same developer. Not so much by the same author. So, like for example, Ever 17, there's like a list of names you can choose as Makoto that you want to be called by. And apparently they're protagonists from other games by KID that I have know nothing about. And the AI games tend to like to reference Danganronpa and Zero Escape a lot. Also, Zero Junior for Virtue's Last Reward is very Junko Enoshima / Monokuma-esque. Clearly inspired by Danganronpa. So, you see a lot of that cross-referencing. There's probably a bunch more like common repeated type things that I'm forgetting. And honestly, some of these things like androids, Facility Central supercomputer really should be on the card. And this urban legends, thought experiments, sort of conversations things. It's conspiracies. Is something that people remember the most about Uchikoshi's games. Something the most iconic. And so you would think that maybe that should be on the card as well. Probably more so than Orphans. I think Orphans really should be replaced with androids. I'll replace it with androids. And then serial killers should go where I put boobs. And here I should put central supercomputer. And now we'll take this away, but it turns it into boobs, which is what got killed off. And androids killed off orphans. Yeah. Those things make more sense to go in there than those. Man, it's hard to get rid of some of these. I guess there's just more than 24 good spaces. I don't know. Maybe some other people should make their own... Sorry about this. I have to... The whole time I wasn't showing what I was typing underneath. Okay. Wow. Sorry about that. That's funny. Maybe some of you would rather put other things in the card than what I did and have better cards. I don't know. Maybe I'll start a trend of some sort. I don't think this will be popular enough to really get the trend going. But that's my attempt, the first Uchikoshi bingo card. The first 24 entries. And if someone else thinks maybe something like Masks, or Everyone Lives at the End, or Urban Legends, Thought Experiments and Conspiracies, or Augmented Reality Assistance, or something like that, takes a better place in the bingo card than what I put in the card. You can redo the card to put those in. Yay! If you watched all of that, thank you for watching it. That was kind of a one-off. I'll go back to Let's Plays now.